I'm Claire Morgan, 30. The daughter always measured by what she wasn't. Tonight, I see it clearly for the first time. In my family, success is worshipped like scripture. My father raises glasses to Olivia. My mother polishes her every achievement, and the relatives applaud as though her victories belong to them too. Me? I'm the invisible one, my work dismissed as hobbies on a laptop, never real enough to earn a seat at their table of pride. But one night, the mask slipped. My father toasted Olivia's future, then laughed at me, calling my career a fantasy, and warning that if I didn't get a real job, I'd be erased from his will. It wasn't money that stung. It was the truth behind his words. In their eyes, I didn't count. Ever been told you don't matter in your own family? Hit like if your dreams have ever been mocked, and comment if someone tried to write you out of your own story. For me, it began the night I whispered a vow into the blue glow of my laptop. One day, their laughter would choke in their throats. The words looped inside my head as if they belonged to a soundtrack I never asked for. The apartment smelled like burnt coffee and dust from the broken blinds that never closed properly. My desk wobbled each time I set down my chipped mug, but it was the only battlefield I had 4 feet of pressed wood holding up a glowing laptop and the last ounce of my faith in myself. The inbox glared back at me. Another client had refused to answer my follow-up emails, the thread ending with a polite but cold, "We've decided to go in another direction." That phrase had become familiar, sharp as glass. I read it again, as though repetition might make the sting duller. It didn't. I leaned back, the chair creaking under my weight, and stared at the peeling paint on the ceiling. My father's voice crept in uninvited, the way it always did when I felt weakest. Online work isn't real work. He had said it with that smirk at Easter, a champagne glass dangling from his hand as if it were a microphone. Margaret had laughed along, though her tone was softer, like she thought cushioning the insult made it less cruel. They never asked what I was building. They only saw the hollow victories they could measure: titles, offices, handshakes at conferences. To them, my world was a joke typed into a screen, but I refused to be their punchline. I turned back to the laptop, scrolling through the half-finished spreadsheets, the drafted pitches, the analytics that only I seemed to care about. Each cell of data was a brick in something no one else could see, a skeleton of a future company that lived only in my stubbornness. Exhaustion pressed on me, but beneath it simmered something more dangerous: resolve. The clock blinked 1:07 a.m. I whispered into the stale air. One more try. I adjusted my pitch deck, trimming words, sharpening lines, hunting for clarity. My fingers cramped, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The glow from the screen threw my reflection faintly against the darkened window. Hollow eyes, messy hair tied back with an elastic that had given up hours ago. I studied the tired stranger staring at me and almost laughed, because I knew exactly what Richard would say if he saw me now. Pathetic. That word had been his favorite weapon since I was old enough to understand it. I leaned closer to the glass, my voice low, steady. One day, they'll choke on their laughter. The sentence left a trace of heat on my lips, a vow carved into silence. My pulse quickened as if the universe had heard me, and maybe it had, because just as I closed the deck, a new notification blinked at the corner of my screen. An email. I clicked it open, my breath caught. The sender's domain wasn't local, not even American. The subject line read, "Partnership inquiry, let's schedule a call." My tired eyes widened. International. Potential client. Out of nowhere. I straightened in my seat, the fatigue evaporating into adrenaline. The night that had threatened to drown me now felt electric, the hum of possibility louder than the silence of failure. A new email arrives. Potential international client wants a call. At my parents' house, every dinner plate was a stage for humiliation. The table gleamed under the chandelier, polished wood reflecting candlelight, and the clink of silver cutlery. My mother had arranged the dinner like a performance, complete with neatly folded linen napkins and crystal glasses that caught the summer heat in fractured prisms. Outside, cicadas hummed through the Houston evening, but inside, the hum was sharper, the rhythm of my family rehearsing the same script they had perfected for years. I remembered the vow I had whispered to my reflection months ago, the fire in my chest when I swore they would choke on their laughter. That promise hovered in me now like an ember, threatening to flare as I sat across from them, watching their practiced smiles and hearing the edges of their mockery even before the words came. Richard, my father, had already slipped into his favorite act. He leaned back in his chair with the confidence of a man who believed the world itself was his endorsement. "Our paper company," he began, tapping the stem of his wineglass, stood firm through recessions, storms, and competition. Real work, honest work, ink and sweat, not pixels and fads. His words were directed at the whole table, but his eyes cut across it, locking on me, daring me to flinch. I held his gaze for a moment, then dropped it, stabbing at the roasted chicken as though carving silence into meat. My stomach twisted, not from hunger, but from the reminder that to him, my entire life's work was invisible, an illusion at best, a disgrace at worst. Margaret, my mother, played her role too. She leaned in with her soft voice, almost gentle, but every syllable dipped in vinegar. "Claire, sweetheart," she said, slicing her steak with the precision of someone carving me open. "Have you thought of looking for a real job? Something stable, something that doesn't depend on emails." She laughed lightly, as though to soften the blow, but her eyes flickered toward Richard for approval. I swallowed hard, my tongue heavy with the reply I wanted to give. Instead, I sipped water, forcing the coldness to settle my throat. The table clattered with dishes and passing platters, but I felt isolated, an audience of one in a theater I hadn't bought tickets for. Olivia, my younger sister, leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. She was 24 and freshly polished from her MBA program, the family's golden investment. "So," she said sweetly, "still unemployed with your laptop empire? Or are you at least charging people to read your emails now?" Her smile was sharp, rehearsed, the way she'd been trained to win. The words struck harder than I expected. My fork froze midair. I looked at her, trying to remember when we'd last been sisters and not adversaries. The distance between us was now wider than the polished table, filled with years of comparison, years of her being the bright one, the clever one, the future. Henry, my uncle, sat at the end, his presence quieter than the rest. He chewed slowly, his eyes traveling across the table, pausing on me. There was no mockery in them, only something unreadable sympathy, perhaps, or recognition. He never interrupted, never played into their theater. He simply observed, a silent witness to the slow corrosion of my place at this table. The dinner stretched on, conversations circling around business, politics, Olivia's internship offers, and Richard's constant reminders of legacy. The room grew heavier with each toast, each sideways glance, each small dismissal. Finally, Richard stood, raising his glass high. His voice carried the practiced rhythm of someone delivering a sermon. "To Olivia," he announced, "our bright future, proof that discipline and tradition still matter. Unlike certain hobbies, she's building something real, something lasting." His words rang out like a verdict. The laughter followed Margaret's soft chuckle, Olivia's triumphant smirk, the polite clinks of glasses. My hand tightened around my fork until the metal dug into my palm. I forced my lips into a smile, because that was the role expected of me, the quiet daughter, the failure hidden in plain sight. But under the smile, fire burned, silent and consuming. Claire grips her fork, forces a smile, while inside burns. Words can bruise deeper than fists. The phrase chased me all the way back from Houston, replaying over and over in my head like an unwanted refrain. My parents' dining room, the laughter clinking against wine glasses, Olivia's smirk it all pressed against my ribs, leaving me sore in places no one could see. The memory lingered like a phantom bruise, invisible but aching every time I breathed. Now it was early morning in Austin, the sky a muted gray washed with the faint smell of rain. I sat in a corner booth at a coffee shop, hands wrapped around a paper cup that had already gone cold. My laptop was open, though the screen blurred as I stared past it, lost in the echoes of that dinner. "Still unemployed with your laptop empire?" Her voice, my own sister's, rattled inside me. It wasn't just the words. It was the certainty in them, the ease with which she believed them true. I shook my head, forcing myself to blink the memory away. The coffee shop was waking up around me, students clutching notebooks, a barista calling out orders, the hiss of steam and chatter filling the air. I tapped the trackpad, bringing my focus back to the small office window glowing in my browser. My team's video call was about to start. When the screen came alive, familiar faces appeared in their little squares. James, my lead developer, unshaven and grinning. Priya, ever sharp-eyed, sipping from her thermos as though caffeine were oxygen. They greeted me with casual warmth that felt worlds away from Houston. "Congrats, boss," James said, raising his mug. "Just saw the confirmation contract signed, sealed, delivered." My chest tightened. The international client, a tiny win, barely enough to cover a month's expenses, but it was real. Proof. something tangible in a sea of skepticism. Priya clapped her hands. Told you they'd bite. We're not invisible, Claire. People are starting to notice. Their smiles should have lifted me higher. But instead, I felt the weight of a different urge, the compulsion to share the news with the very people who had cut me down. My fingers moved almost on instinct, pulling out my phone. I drafted a message. Just closed our first international contract. Thought you'd be proud. The words blinked back at me, raw and unguarded. I stared at them, heart thudding, thumb hovering over send. For a fleeting second, I imagined my mother's face softening, my father's expression cracking, Olivia's smugness dissolving into silence. The fantasy was sharp, sweet. Then I deleted the text number. Not yet. They didn't deserve to know, not when their laughter still echoed like chains around my throat. I slid the phone face down on the table, pushing the moment away as though burying it under steel. Later, when the call ended and my team dispersed back into their worlds, I sat in my cramped office, staring at the whiteboard filled with deadlines and scribbled dreams. The sting of Houston was still there, but something inside me had hardened, cooling into resolve. They'll never know until it's too late, I whispered into the empty room. The words rang like iron against iron, a quiet anthem of defiance. Silence would be my weapon. I would let my work grow in shadows, roots deep and unseen, until the day it broke the surface so violently they couldn't ignore it. The office air buzzed with the hum of the old air conditioner, and I felt the faintest ripple of something different, momentum, perhaps, or destiny stretching its limbs. I closed my laptop, ready to breathe for the first time that day, when my phone vibrated against the desk. A news alert flashed across the screen. Austin startup scene spotlight, Claire Morgan mentioned. My pulse surged, fingers trembling as I reached for the phone, knowing the silence I had chosen might not hold for long. News alert. Austin startup scene spotlight, Claire Morgan mentioned. Every holiday was a battlefield disguised with cranberry sauce. The scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon rolls curled through the Morgan dining room. But to me, it was the smell of smoke on the air before a skirmish. Thanksgiving had always carried that double-edged warmth on the surface, cruelty simmering underneath. The long mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier, every polished fork and folded napkin staged like a soldier waiting for orders. I sat near the middle, squeezed between Margaret's careful smiles and Olivia's phone that never seemed to leave her hand. Cousins laughed at the far end, trading stories about colleges and internships, the kind of achievements my father loved to parade. I braced myself for the inevitable moment when the spotlight would swing toward me. It didn't take long. Richard lifted his glass of wine and let his voice carry across the table, each word heavy as a hammer. Maybe Claire can design logos for the turkey industry. His laughter rolled over the plates, loud and confident, as though mocking me was a family tradition worth toasting. The room rippled with polite chuckles. Margaret reached for my arm, her tone quieter, almost apologetic. Your father just worries. Maybe you should apply at the bank, at least until something more stable comes along. Her eyes avoided mine, as if she knew her words added weight to the bruise rather than lightened it. I pushed peas around my plate, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. The cranberry sauce bled into the turkey meat like a wound I couldn't close. Then Richard leaned forward, his voice dropping into something colder, more deliberate. And let me be clear, he said, fixing me with that stare I'd known since childhood, the one that measured my worth like a balance sheet. If you don't get a real job, don't expect a cent in my will. The words landed heavier than I expected, not because I craved his inheritance, but because they revealed the weapon he intended to wield, control through money, even in death. Across from me, Olivia giggled, her phone angled discreetly as she snapped pictures. The faint click of the shutter was unmistakable. She typed something with quick fingers, lips curling in private amusement. I didn't need to see the post to know it would drip with sarcasm. Heat rose in my chest, but I swallowed it. My fork pressed grooves into the napkin as I gripped it tighter, holding back the impulse to fling words across the table. Instead, I kept my face still, my smile painted and thin. Inside, though, my resolve was sharpening, each insult whetting the blade of patience I carried. Plates clattered as the meal wound down, chairs scraping back, relatives carrying dishes toward the kitchen. The noise masked the soft shuffle of Henry stepping closer. My uncle's eyes, always quiet, lingered on me with something that almost felt like understanding. As I stacked plates beside him, he leaned just close enough for only me to hear. His voice was low, steady, carrying none of the showmanship that poisoned Richard's. Don't waste breath. Let the truth do the talking. The words slipped into me like a seed dropped into fertile soil. Small but alive, destined to grow. Henry whispers as they clear plates. Don't waste breath. Let the truth do the talking. Sometimes silence is sharper than any sword. The hum of the heater filled the office as I hunched over my laptop, the only sound in a room washed in blue glow. Outside, the city was brittle with winter, frost clouding the edges of the window. My little office looked like nothing from the street, just another cramped space above a coffee shop. But to me, it was the headquarters of something I knew would one day tower over the scoffing voices of my family. The knock at the door startled me. Few people visited at this hour. When I opened it, Henry stood there, coat dusted with the faint shimmer of cold air, eyes steady. He carried something wrapped in cloth. Without a word, he stepped inside, the weight of his silence as deliberate as mine. He set the bundle on my desk and unwrapped it. A small wooden sculpture, the kind you'd miss at a glance, but which grew more intricate the longer you studied it. Curves intertwined with grooves, light catching delicate patterns in the grain. I carved this years ago, Henry said, lowering himself into the chair across from me. Showed it to the family once. They laughed. Said art was for people with no real skills. His mouth tightened, but there was no bitterness, only memory. I stopped showing them after that, but I never stopped carving. I turned the sculpture in my hands. The wood warmed despite the cold. Its weight was small, but its meaning pressed heavy. Henry leaned forward, elbows on his knees. People only see what they want until reality crushes them. His voice carried none of the pomp my father loved. No cutting sarcasm like Olivia's, no passive softness like Margaret's. It was plain, stripped of performance. I felt the truth in it settle inside me like iron. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened my inbox, reflex tugging me toward the glow of opportunity. My pulse jumped at the subject line waiting there. Feature request. Major business magazine interested in interview. For a long moment, I just stared. The cursor blinked as though daring me to hesitate. I looked at Henry. His eyes followed mine to the screen. He didn't smile, didn't press. He just nodded, the way someone nods when they recognize a soldier stepping into a battlefield they'd trained for. Click. I accepted the request. My fingers didn't shake this time. A rush of heat climbed my chest. It wasn't the frantic kind that came with fear, it was steadier, rooted. This was no longer about clawing for scraps of validation. This was the first stone I was stacking for the stage I would build. The interview would come, and with it, the truth they could no longer laugh away. Henry rose, placed a hand briefly on my shoulder, then left without another word. His silence said enough. The office door clicked shut. I stared at the sculpture on my desk, the reflection of its curves shimmering faintly against the laptop screen. My lips parted, voice barely audible in the stillness. Justice will come, on my terms. Out there, my company's name was climbing. At home, I was still a joke. The ink had barely dried when I let out the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hand lingered on the last page of the contract, the letters bold at the top. Laverne Luxury Group, Paris. A European luxury brand, real money, real recognition, the kind of deal that set startups apart from the crowd. My team had been watching the negotiations unfold for weeks, the tension like static in the air. Now, as I laid the pen down, the room erupted. "We did it!" shouted Mara, the youngest on the team, throwing her arms up like we had just won a championship. "Correction," Daniel added, leaning against the wall with a grin. "Claire did it. We just rode her stubbornness like a wave." Their laughter filled the cramped Austin office, bouncing off bare walls still adorned with sticky notes and sketches. The space wasn't much rickety desks, secondhand chairs, the faint smell of burnt coffee in the air, but today it felt like the headquarters of an empire in the making. Someone popped a bottle of cheap, sparkling wine. The cork ricocheted against the ceiling, showering us with droplets as Mara poured into mismatched mugs. "Here's to Laverne, and here's to Claire, who kept emailing them even after they ghosted us for 3 months." I raised my mug with the rest, but my smile didn't quite reach my chest. As they toasted, my mind strayed uninvited back to Houston, to my father's smirk, my sister's sarcastic quips, my mother's half-hearted excuses. Their voices lingered like a bruise. "Claire, you have to tell them now," Daniel insisted, seeing the hesitation in my eyes. "Come on, this is huge. It's not just survival money, this is prestige." I shook my head, sipping the tart fizz. "Number not yet. Why? Mara frowned. Wouldn't this shut them up for good? I let the question hang. If only it were that simple. They wouldn't see the contract. They'd see a fluke. They wouldn't see the empire. They'd see me playing pretend. Their laughter would swallow the truth before it had a chance to stand. Justice wasn't about blurting facts, it was about timing. The office buzzed late into the afternoon, chatter and music spilling over into the evening. When my phone buzzed, I almost ignored it. The name flashing across the screen, though, froze me. Richard Morgan. I stepped into the hallway, pressing the phone to my ear. Hello? His voice came sharp and smug, the same tone he'd used to dominate boardrooms and family dinners. Claire finally reached you. So, have you found a teller job at the bank yet? The question landed like a slap, dripping with sarcasm. He chuckled, satisfied before I even answered, as though my silence was all the confirmation he needed. I walked back into the office, my team still celebrating inside, their voices muffled through the glass. My hand brushed against the crisp edges of the signed contract lying on my desk. The company seal gleamed faintly under the fluorescent light. Still chasing your little laptop dream? He pressed. You know, the world doesn't wait forever for people to grow up. I didn't answer. I couldn't, not because I didn't have words, but because the words I wanted didn't belong to this moment. They belonged to the day when his voice would falter, when his laughter would choke in his throat. His chuckle stretched longer. All right. Don't work too hard at your hobby. The line clicked as he hung up, still amused at the sound of his own dismissal. I stood there, the silence buzzing louder than his voice had. My eyes drifted back to the desk. The contract lay framed already. Daniel's idea, history needs to hang where we can see it. I set the phone down beside it, fingers tracing the embossed crest of Laverne. My chest tightened, but not with defeat. It was something heavier, steadier, sharper. I hung up silently, eyes fixed on the framed contract. Every bite of turkey tasted like ashes. The Morgan dining room glowed with warm light, chandeliers scattering reflections across polished silverware and glasses brimming with wine. Aromas of roasted turkey, spiced yams, and pies cooling on the counter filled the air, but the scent only made my stomach twist. Around me, chatter and laughter swelled in waves, the familiar chorus of my family's holiday gatherings. Only for me, every laugh carried a sharper edge, like a blade pressed against skin. Richard presided at the head of the table, carving slices of turkey with the practiced authority of a man used to commanding not only the boardroom, but also his family. He carried his stories like weapons, and tonight, I was the inevitable target. Let's talk about futures, he announced as he set down the carving knife. Olivia, here our shining star has just secured a prestigious corporate internship, Fortune 500 company, no less. His eyes gleamed with pride as he gestured toward my younger sister, seated nearby in her tailored blazer, even at the dinner table. The cousins clapped politely, a few offering congratulations. Olivia basked in the attention, leaning forward, smirking as though the applause were hers by birthright. It's only the start, she said, her tone dripping with satisfaction. Networking, real-world training. Not everyone can land this kind of position. My fork scraped softly against porcelain, my eyes lowered to the turkey breast cooling on my plate. Margaret, ever the diplomat, added sweetly, Olivia is the family's future. Such a clear direction, such a steady path. Claire, you still freelancing? Her words hovered in the air, carefully crafted as though concern could mask the cut beneath. I swallowed hard, the word freelancing curdling in my ears. To them, no matter the contract signed, no matter the work completed, I was still playing at adulthood. Richard leaned back in his chair, wineglass in hand. His laughter rolled out before he spoke, booming and certain. Claire, better find real work or you're out of the will. The table roared with laughter. Aunts and cousins chuckled, some glancing my way with a hint of pity but most carried by the current of Richard's authority. Even Olivia leaned sideways in her chair, lifting her phone under the table to snap a picture of my forced smile, the perfect souvenir of humiliation. Henry sat 2 seats down, silent as ever, his expression heavy. His gaze caught mine for a fraction of a second, steady, almost apologetic, but he said nothing. His silence was a shield he could not extend across the battlefield of this table. The laughter swelled again, as Richard clinked his knife against his glass, commanding attention. A toast, he declared, standing tall. To real success! Crystal chimed against Crystal. Olivia smirked. Margaret nodded approvingly. Cousins lifted their glasses obediently. The room rang with agreement, the word real echoing in my chest louder than any applause. I pressed my hands into my lap, nails biting into my palm as I forced the corners of my mouth upward, the mask of a smile stretched thin. The taste of turkey turned bitter on my tongue. My throat tightened with every gulp of air that carried their laughter deeper into me. No one noticed the way my fist curled, knuckles paling under the tablecloth. They were too busy raising their glasses, too blinded by the sparkle of Olivia's internship and Richard's booming certainty. I lowered my eyes but clenched my fist under the table. I stopped waiting for them to see me. I began preparing for them to choke on the truth. The hum of keyboards and muffled conversations echoed through the sleek co-working space in downtown Austin. Glass walls reflected bright afternoon light, and the energy of young founders pulsed around me, laptops open, heads bent over ambitious dreams. For once I felt at home in that rhythm. Not in Houston, not at the Morgan dining table, but here where ideas mattered more than surnames. My phone buzzed against the polished desk. Unknown number. I hesitated for a moment before swiping to answer. Claire Morgan? The voice was brisk, professional, carrying the practiced tone of someone accustomed to making introductions. This is Dana from Business Outlook. We've been following your company's growth, and we'd like to run a profile on you in our fall edition. It's a feature issue rising entrepreneurs transforming the digital economy. The words landed like a match struck in darkness. For a heartbeat, I said nothing. The image of Richard's raised glass, Olivia's smirk, my mother's sigh, all the echoes of Thanksgiving rose in my mind. Every laugh at my expense, every threat about the will, every label of pathetic. Yes, I replied, steady, as if the answer had always been waiting for this moment. I'd be interested. Excellent, Dana continued, her enthusiasm sharpening. We'll send over the agreement, and you can choose timing. We'd love to photograph you at your office, see your team in action. We spoke logistics, dates, topics. When the call ended, the silence in the co-working space felt charged, my heart drumming against my ribs. A knock on the glass broke the moment. Henry stood at the door, shoulders slightly hunched, as though he'd stepped into a world that didn't quite belong to him. His eyes softened when they met mine. You're hard to track down these days, he said, settling into the chair across from me. His hands carried the faint smell of wood polish, remnants of his craft. I told him about the call, the offer, the platform it promised. His brows furrowed, his quiet voice weighed heavier than any shout. Claire, once the truth is out, nothing will be the same. I leaned forward, fingers tapping lightly against the signed contract with Laverne that still lay framed on the desk beside me. My voice was sharper than I intended. That's exactly the point. For years, silence had been my armor. Tonight I was reforging it into a weapon. Henry studied me for a moment, then nodded with the resignation of someone who'd fought his own quiet wars. He placed a hand on mine briefly, rough and calloused, before standing to leave. Just remember, justice can cut both ways. When the email came through with the contract, I didn't hesitate. The timing field blinked, waiting for my answer. I scrolled to the fall calendar and deliberately set the feature for the same week as the Morgan family dinner. The trap would not just be sprung, it would be cinematic. My hand shook slightly as I signed the digital agreement, the stylus etching my name across the glowing screen. The moment sealed something deeper than ink, it sealed inevitability. I leaned back, exhaling, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. For the first time in months, I wasn't just enduring their laughter, I was orchestrating its end. The victory barely had time to settle before my phone lit up with a new notification. Olivia's TikTok played without sound, but the caption flashed bold against the video. My sister still broke, LOL. The screen froze on her smirk, her laughter caught mid-frame, daring me to respond. I didn't. Not yet. It wasn't my father's disdain that cut deepest, it was my sister's laughter. The spring air on campus carried the scent of budding magnolias and coffee wafting from crowded student cafes. Students sprawled on the lawns, laughter and conversation rising like music against the bright afternoon. I had just finished a client pitch across town and decided to cut through the university grounds on my way back. The sight of clusters of students, the rush of ambition and energy, reminded me of a time when possibility still felt unscarred by ridicule. But then I heard it, her voice. Olivia's. She was holding court under the shade of an oak tree, surrounded by friends with iced lattes and backpacks tossed carelessly at their feet. She gestured with her phone, her laughter bright and sharp, carrying farther than she knew. She's basically unemployed with a fancy laptop, Olivia said, her tone laced with cruel delight. Pretending to be a CEO while sitting in a dingy apartment. I mean, come on. Her friends laughed, some loud, some politely, the kind of laughter given to keep pace with the leader of the group. My chest tightened, each chuckle puncturing deeper than I wanted to admit. I froze just beyond sight, my client's signed documents still heavy in my bag, my success invisible to those who mattered least, yet mocked the most. Then, amid the laughter, one voice cut differently. A brunette with glasses leaned in and asked softly, "Wait, isn't she the founder of Morgan Digital? I think I read something about her in a startup blog." Olivia's laugh faltered, her smile tightening as though stitched by threads of denial. She waved the suggestion away, rolling her eyes. Blogs will write about anyone. She probably wrote it herself. The group erupted again, though less evenly now. A few exchanged uncertain glances, but Olivia's confidence dominated the circle. I turned and walked away, my steps steady though the sting burned in my chest. Silence had become my strategy, and I clung to it like armor. Every instinct screamed to turn, to shout, to drop the weight of my contracts and bank statements onto that patch of grass. But I didn't. I walked on, each step whispering the same vow, not yet. Later that night, scrolling through my notifications, I saw Olivia's new post, a TikTok clip, her smirk framed by neon dorm lights. Imagine being 30 and broken while your little sis wins. The words pierced sharper than the video itself. I closed the app before the bile in my throat could rise. But the internet, unlike family dinners, doesn't play by the rules of silence. When I checked again hours later, I found a comment beneath her post that stopped me cold. A classmate had written, "Google her, she's worth millions." The likes climbed rapidly. The comment lit up, drawing eyes faster than Olivia could delete it. Screenshots spread, shared across group chats. The image of Olivia's laughter, always so easy, so cruel, was replaced by something else I could almost see through the phone screen. She was staring at her device, thumb scrolling furiously, eyes darting as though she were trying to smother a fire already burning too fast. For the first time, it wasn't my humiliation on display. It was hers, and she knew it. Sometimes victory is just letting the truth walk in at the perfect moment. The magazine lay open across my desk, the glossy paper still smelling faintly of fresh ink. The headline sprawled across 2 pages in bold, unmistakable type. Claire Morgan, founder of Morgan Digital, estimated net worth $7 million. Below it, a photo of me mid-speech at a global conference in Berlin, hands raised, expression fierce. Another showed me seated with international executives, smiling as though the laughter of my family had never once gnawed at the back of my mind. The article was not just flattering, it was definitive. My company wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't a hobby. It was a force, and now the world had proof. I let the words wash over me. From a cramped Austin apartment to international contracts, her resilience is reshaping the digital landscape. I lingered on that line, imagining my father's scoff twisting into silence, my mother's polite pity cracking into disbelief, Olivia's smug grin evaporating in the face of truth she couldn't laugh away. The office around me hummed with the familiar rhythm of my team's chatter and keyboard clicks. But today, it felt different, as though every sound carried the undertone of triumph. Henry's shadow fell across the desk before his voice did. He'd read the piece too, his copy folded beneath his arm. "You know this will burn bridges," he said quietly. The weight of his words carried not by volume, but by conviction. I closed the magazine with deliberate calm, my fingers tracing the embossed cover. "Bridges that never carried me anyway," I replied. The words didn't tremble. They rang with the clarity of a truth long buried but finally exhumed. He studied me for a long moment, eyes soft with pride and worry entwined. "You can't unring a bell, Claire. Once it's out there, the silence you've used all this time, it won't protect you anymore." I leaned back, exhaling slowly, my gaze drawn to the framed contract with the European brand that had changed everything. Good. I'm done with silence. Notifications buzzed at the corner of my screen. Curious, I clicked and froze. The article wasn't just live. It was trending. The headline had already jumped to Twitter's business feed, hashtags sprouting like wildfire. Number Claire Morgan was beginning to circulate. Retweets from investors, founders, even professors in Houston, my hometown, were lighting up the thread. Houston circles. My breath caught as realizations set in. They already knew. Not tomorrow, not after dinner, not in whispered phone calls passed down through relatives. They were seeing it now. The city was whispering, and the whispers would walk straight into the Morgan dining room tonight. Miles away, I could picture Olivia, sprawled on her dorm bed with her usual smirk, opening her phone to the same headline. I imagined the moment her scrolling froze, her jaw tightening, the confident cruelty in her eyes flickering into panic. She would know the dinner showdown was only hours away. And for the first time, she wouldn't be holding the stage. She would be standing under the weight of truth, with nowhere to run. The trap was no longer hidden. It had been sprung. Every clink of cutlery feels like a countdown. The dining room was awash with the familiar smells of roasted meat, butter, and autumn spices. Yet to me, every aroma carried a strange heaviness, as though the food itself knew the evening was more performance than meal. The table gleamed under the chandelier's pale glow, crystal glasses lined like soldiers, the silverware polished to a mirror sheen. I sat in my usual place, across from my father's throne at the head of the table, and every tick of the clock above the mantelpiece throbbed like a drumbeat against my ribs. Richard Morgan, my father, presided over the evening like a king rehearsing his favorite monologues. His voice boomed as he launched into a story about real work, puffing his chest and wagging a fork like a scepter. Back in my day, men earned their keep with sweat, not with pixels, he said, pausing just long enough for his audience of relatives to chuckle obligingly. His laugh was louder than all of theirs, echoing in the wood-paneled room. Margaret, my mother, gave her soft, weary sigh, the one that often came before her subtle, poisonous nudges. She leaned toward me with a brittle smile. "Claire, darling, maybe you should take a page out of your sister's book. Olivia's doing so well, securing that internship. Stability, reputation, things that last." The words slid over me like grease. I had learned not to flinch, not to let the heat rise to my cheeks. Across the table, Henry sat in his quiet way, carving his food with deliberate calm, his gaze flitting to me when the jabs landed. He didn't speak, but his silence spoke volumes. Olivia, usually the loudest of the chorus, wasn't herself tonight. She stabbed at her green beans, eyes darting to her phone every few minutes. The glow lit her face a sickly shade, highlighting the twitch in her jaw. She forced small laughs at our father's jokes, but each one cracked at the edges, brittle. The cutlery scraped and clattered. My father leaned back in his chair, glass raised as though he were about to toast his own wit. "So, Claire," he sneered, lips curling into the shape of a predator, "when will you stop playing pretend?" The table hushed, all eyes swiveling toward me. My fingers rested lightly on the stem of my wine glass. I met his stare without blinking, my calmness unnerving even me. But before I could speak, Olivia's voice cracked the silence. Her words burst out in a rush, louder than intended, trembling with urgency. "Dad, you need to see this." Every head turned. Her phone shook faintly in her grip, screen casting blue light across her pale face. The table's fragile balance teetered. In the air hung the unspoken. Something had shifted, and no joke, no toast, no sneer could turn it back. Every clink of cutlery feels like a countdown. The silence that followed Olivia's words was jagged. A silence with edges sharp enough to cut through the oak-paneled walls. My father's glass remained suspended in midair, his smug grin faltering as if he'd been caught in the middle of a performance where the script had suddenly vanished. The chandelier light trembled faintly across his face, and for the first time in years I saw something other than absolute certainty in his eyes, a flicker, brief but undeniable, of doubt. Olivia's hand shook as she pushed the phone across the table, its glow cutting through the heavy atmosphere like a flare in darkness. The article's headline screamed in bold letters, "Claire Morgan, founder of Morgan Digital, net worth $7 million. A professional photo filled the screen, me, standing at a podium at a global tech conference, confident, smiling, the kind of image that bore no resemblance to the caricature my family had spent years ridiculing. The room's rhythm broke apart. Forks stopped midair. Margaret leaned closer, squinting at the words, her lips parting soundlessly. Cousins exchanged quick, embarrassed glances, whispers already crawling between them like startled mice. Olivia's pale face glistened with a sheen of sweat, her attempt at nonchalance undone by the twitch of her jaw. My father finally barked a laugh, the brittle kind that tried to reclaim lost ground. 7 million? Some puff piece. Journalists these days, they'll write anything if you pay them enough. But his voice carried strain, cracking beneath the bravado. He reached for his fork as though grounding himself, stabbing a potato too hard so that it split apart, steam rising like smoke from wreckage. I sat still, calm, in a way that felt alien and absolute. Inside, my heart hammered with the force of everything I'd hidden years of late nights, endless rejection, grit piled atop grit. Yet outwardly, I remained composed, the same pathetic daughter they had mocked, only now cloaked in silence that spoke louder than any words. Henry, across the table, set his fork down gently and folded his hands. His eyes, warm and steady, met mine with a glimmer of pride he didn't voice. "Sometimes," he said evenly, his voice carrying in the hush, "the truth doesn't need defending. It stands tall on its own." His words slid into the room like a stone dropped into still water, rippling against every stiff posture and frozen expression. Margaret cleared her throat, voice trembling as she sought refuge in denial. "Claire, dear, surely this is exaggerated? Net worths. They're often inflated, aren't they?" Her hands fluttered like nervous birds as she looked from me to Richard, desperate for reassurance, desperate for the old order to return. Olivia's phone buzzed with notifications piling in shares, comments, retweets. Each vibration seemed to hammer another nail into the coffin of pretense. A cousin muttered something about recognition, another about seeing my face on LinkedIn just last week. The walls of mockery they had built so confidently around me were crumbling, brick by brick, under the weight of undeniable proof. Richard slammed his hand against the table, silverware rattling. "This family has real legacies. Businesses built with hands, not these illusions." His voice shook, anger bleeding into desperation. The chandelier above quivered from the force of his blow. He looked around the table for support, but found only downcast eyes, fidgeting fingers, relatives shrinking away from his fury. I leaned forward slightly, not to gloat, not to speak vengeance, but to simply exist in the space they had always denied me. My silence pressed harder than any rebuttal could. And in that silence, Richard's empire of scorn cracked further, the soundless collapse echoing louder than his rage. Olivia shifted uncomfortably, her face a storm of humiliation and realization. For years, she had wielded laughter as her blade, and now it dulled, slipping from her grasp as the world outside the dining room reshaped its opinion with every scroll and click. She no longer looked like the triumphant daughter basking in favor. She looked like a girl who had bet on the wrong truth. The air thickened with the scent of roasted meat cooling on untouched plates, the grandeur of the dinner now absurd in its impotence. No toast could cover the fracture. No joke could undo the revelation that had taken root in every pair of eyes. And then Richard whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "This isn't real. It can't be real." His voice, once booming and absolute, shrank into something fragile. I let the silence grow. I let it wrap around him like a noose of his own making. The clinking of cutlery did not resume. Instead, a heavier sound filled the room, the weight of truth, inescapable, undeniable, reshaping everything it touched. "Dad, you need to see this," Olivia's voice repeated, trembling again. But this time her plea carried no challenge, no mockery, only fear. She pushed the phone closer, her hand pale and trembling. On the screen, beneath the headline, the comments scrolled endlessly. Finally, recognition for a visionary, from invisible to unstoppable. Morgan Digital is the future. Her father's kingdom of contempt was collapsing in real time, and there was nothing he could do but watch. Every clink of cutlery feels like a countdown. The dining room was awash with the familiar smells of roasted meat, butter, and autumn spices, yet to me every aroma carried a strange heaviness, as though the food itself knew the evening was more performance than meal. The table gleamed under the chandelier's pale glow, crystal glasses lined like soldiers, the silverware polished to a mirror sheen. I sat in my usual place, across from my father's throne at the head of the table, and every tick of the clock above the mantelpiece throbbed like a drumbeat against my ribs. Richard Morgan, my father, presided over the evening like a king rehearsing his favorite monologues. His voice boomed as he launched into a story about real work, puffing his chest and wagging a fork like a scepter. "Back in my day, men earned their keep with sweat, not with pixels," he said, pausing just long enough for his audience of relatives to chuckle obligingly. His laugh was louder than all of theirs, echoing in the wood-paneled room. Margaret, my mother, gave her soft, weary sigh, the one that often came before her subtle, poisonous nudges. She leaned toward me with a brittle smile. "Claire, darling, maybe you should take a page out of your sister's book. Olivia's doing so well, securing that internship. Stability, reputation, things that last." The words slid over me like grease. I had learned not to flinch, not to let the heat rise to my cheeks. Across the table, Henry sat in his quiet way, carving his food with deliberate calm, his gaze flitting to me when the jabs landed. He didn't speak, but his silence spoke volumes. Olivia, usually the loudest of the chorus, wasn't herself tonight. She stabbed at her green beans, eyes darting to her phone every few minutes. The glow lit her face a sickly shade, highlighting the twitch in her jaw. She forced small laughs at our father's jokes, but each one cracked at the edges, brittle. The cutlery scraped and clattered. My father leaned back in his chair, glass raised as though he were about to toast his own wit. "So, Claire," he sneered, lips curling into the shape of a predator, "when will you stop playing pretend?" The table hushed, all eyes swiveling toward me. My fingers rested lightly on the stem of my wine glass. I met his stare without blinking, my calmness unnerving even me. But before I could speak, Olivia's voice cracked the silence. Her words burst out in a rush, louder than intended, trembling with urgency. "Dad, you need to see this." Every head turned. Her phone shook faintly in her grip, screen casting blue light across her pale face. The table's fragile balance teetered. In the air hung the unspoken. Something had shifted, and no joke, no toast, no sneer could turn it back. Sometimes the truth doesn't whisper, it detonates. The chandelier hummed faintly above, the light glinting off crystal glasses that stood untouched. Every fork had stilled, every knife lay abandoned mid-cut. Olivia's trembling hands clutched her phone, her knuckles pale, her voice uneven as she forced the words into the thick silence. Claire Morgan, founder of Morgan Digital, estimated net worth $7 million. For a moment, no one breathed. The sentence hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot, impossible to ignore, impossible to put back. Richard barked out a short laugh, sharp and disbelieving. "Ridiculous," he snapped, but his hand darted across the table quicker than his words betrayed. He snatched the glowing device from Olivia's grip, nearly upsetting a wine glass. His thumb scrolled furiously, the glow from the screen reflecting against his reddening face. The laughter died in his throat. His jaw tightened, his lips moving silently as he devoured each line of the article headlines declaring global contracts, photos of me on stage at conferences in Paris, London, New York. Each swipe stripped a layer of his certainty away, leaving only pallor. Margaret's gasp sliced through the silence. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes darting between my father's drained expression and my still, calm posture. "Oh my God," she whispered, voice breaking. I lifted my glass of water and sipped, steady, deliberate, as though we were all simply passing through another Sunday dinner. The cool liquid traced its way down my throat, grounding me against the hurricane unfurling across the table. I didn't gloat. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Richard slammed the phone down, the screen clattering against the polished wood. He tried to muster fury, tried to ignite the room with the same old fire that had scorched me for years. But the words faltered, crumbled before they ever formed. His face, so often flushed with self-assured arrogance, was now chalk white. The silence was heavier than any insult he had ever thrown. Chairs creaked as relatives shifted uneasily, their laughter curdled, their smirks erased. Olivia stared at her lap, her hands empty, her cheeks burning. Margaret's lips trembled, but she said nothing more. I set down my glass gently, the faint click loud in the vacuum left by their disbelief. My heart beat steady, not racing finally. The battlefield was theirs, not mine. And then Henry's voice broke through, low, even, and merciless in its simplicity. Now the truth speaks for itself. No one dared move. The echo of his words filled every corner of that room, sealing the moment in stone. For years they spoke over me. Tonight, one sentence was enough. The air in the dining room felt brittle, as if the chandelier above might shatter from the weight of silence. My father's fingers twitched against the tablecloth, the veins in his hands standing out like cracks in stone. He opened his mouth, shut it again, then finally managed, Is this true?" The words were uneven, stripped of their usual authority, as though he could barely recognize his own voice. My mother leaned forward, still pale, her pearls quivering against her collarbone as she whispered, "Why didn't you tell us?" Her tone was not one of celebration, not even of pride, but of confusion, tinged with guilt, as though my silence had somehow been a betrayal greater than their years of mockery. I kept my gaze steady. Across the table, Olivia sat rigid, her phone abandoned beside her untouched plate, her lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes, usually sharpened with sarcasm, now brimmed with awe and shame. She looked at me not as a sister to be teased, but as someone she had never really known. I let the question hang, let the silence stretch until every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway hammered like a drumbeat. Then I said, softly, evenly, "You never asked, so I never told you." The simplicity of it landed like a hammer blow. No flourish, no speech, just a truth so bare it stripped them naked in their seats. Richard's chest rose sharply, as though he had been struck. Margaret's lips pressed together, trembling, the shame in her eyes deeper than any apology could cover. Olivia's shoulders sank, the weight of recognition dragging her posture down. For years, their words had been daggers, their laughter a chorus of dismissal, and now, with a single sentence, I had returned every wound, not with fury, but with calm inevitability. It was justice without rage, the sharpest kind. The table was frozen in that moment, fractured, but unable to move. Then Richard's face contorted, rage and desperation swirling in equal measure. His fists slammed against the polished wood, rattling glasses, startling gasps from the cousins who had stayed silent all night. His voice cracked, betraying a weakness he could not hide. "We're still family, we can work together now." The words hung there, not an olive branch, but a plea dressed in authority. A crumbling man clinging to the power he had already lost. Respect born of numbers is still disdain in disguise. The dinner plates had been cleared, but the bitter aftertaste lingered in the air. We moved into the living room, the soft lamplight casting long shadows across the old family portraits. My father sat rigid in his armchair, jaw tight, while my mother perched on the edge of the couch, her hands folded as though in prayer. Olivia lingered by the doorway, eyes swollen from the storm that was still brewing inside her. Richard was the first to speak, his voice stripped of the mocking lilt he had carried for years. "Claire," he began slowly, almost carefully, "you've proven yourself. Clearly you've done well. But you must understand our family name has taken hits these past years. My company isn't what it used to be." He leaned forward, forcing gravity into his tone. "With your resources, you could help rebuild it. Imagine Morgan Paper rising again with you at the helm." The irony was a bitter pill. For years he had dismissed me as a failure. Now, with his empire crumbling, he dangled it before me as though it were a gift. Margaret added quickly, her eyes darting to mine, "We can be proud of you if you help us. This could be a way to heal everything. The family's reputation, our place in the community, yours too." She smiled faintly, but the smile was brittle, a mask stretched too tight. Olivia shifted, clearing her throat. Her voice trembled with forced sweetness. "I always believed in you, sis. I knew you'd make something of yourself." The lie rang louder than any of her jeers had before. I remembered every smirk, every mocking TikTok, every cruel joke shared at my expense. Her eyes avoided mine even as she said it, betraying the hollow plea beneath the words. I studied them carefully, my father's desperate ambition, my mother's quiet manipulation, my sister's panicked revision of history. None of it was love. None of it was pride. It was opportunism, painted over with family rhetoric. What they wanted wasn't me, it was what I had built. Slowly, I reached into my bag and pulled out the glossy magazine, the one with my photograph emblazoned across the cover. There I was, standing at a podium in Paris, addressing an international audience, the headline bold above my head. Claire Morgan, the digital visionary redefining global strategy. I placed it on the coffee table with deliberate calm, the sound of paper against wood sharp in the silence. My voice was steady, firm, final. "I don't need your approval, not anymore." The words sliced through the room like a blade. For once, no one spoke over me. Richard's face slackened, the weight of defeat pressing down until his shoulders curled inward. Margaret's lips parted, but no words came. Her silence was heavier than her criticisms had ever been. Olivia's eyes welled. She spun away suddenly, her sobs breaking loose as she stumbled down the stairs, the sound of her crying echoing through the house. My father looked crushed. My mother sat speechless. And for the first time in years, I held the power in their home. "Justice didn't roar," it whispered freedom as I walked away. The winter air bit against my skin as I stepped out of the Morgan house, the door closing behind me with a weight that felt heavier than oaken hinges. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking away in shame. I was walking away in silence that belonged to me, not to their ridicule. My car waited in the driveway, headlights glowing faintly against the darkness. "Claire!" The cry cracked the night. Olivia stumbled out of the doorway, cheeks streaked with tears, her voice breaking on each word. "I was wrong. God, I was so wrong about you." She rushed forward, clutching my arm as though the gesture itself could rewrite years of cruelty. Her sobs shook her shoulders, and in her eyes I saw not just shame but the fragile beginnings of remorse. I wrapped my arms around her briefly, letting her collapse against me. The hug was not forgiveness, it was acknowledgement. When she pulled back, searching my face for words, I gave her none. Some wounds do not heal with apologies. Some truths do not need to be spoken again. Henry stepped forward from the shadows of the porch, his calm presence grounding me. His hand rested lightly on my shoulder, and his voice carried the wisdom of someone who had survived the same battlefield in different clothes. "You've carried this weight long enough," he said softly. "Tonight, you dropped it." His words weren't praise, they were release, and I felt them settle deep in my bones. I turned once more to the house. Its brick walls loomed against the night, every window reflecting fragments of my past. Dinners where laughter cut deeper than knives, holidays where my failures had been the centerpiece, long nights of driving home with humiliation burning in my chest. The house was full of memories that had once defined me, but now they were only echoes, shadows I was finally leaving behind. The car engine hummed as I slid into the driver's seat. The road stretched ahead, the city lights glittering like promises waiting to be claimed. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed no trace of defeat, only resolve. Justice came late, but it came, and that's enough. The thought lingered as I pulled onto the street, each turn of the wheels carrying me further from their judgment, closer to my own horizon. For once, I wasn't running from their voices, I was driving toward my own. Then, just as the silence settled, my phone buzzed against the console. A message lit the screen. Request. Live television interview primetime feature. My lips curved into the faintest smile. Justice had whispered tonight, but tomorrow it would speak louder, and the world would listen. Betrayal had marked the beginning, but truth carried the final word, her quiet triumph, leaving those who once mocked her in stunned silence. Justice did not storm the gates. It arrived with calm certainty, proving that courage and patience could dismantle even the deepest scorn. When injustice is met with unwavering resolve, its defeat is inevitable, for no wall of lies can stand against the tide of truth. And sometimes, freedom is nothing more than the strength to walk away, never needing their approval again. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, subscribe, and leave your thoughts. Comment 1 if you felt the justice, or 2 if you wished for more.